In this video, we're going to get our hands wet. We're talking about how to collect a water sample. This video is going over the basic protocol for how to collect a water sample. You'll use this protocol to collect the water samples you need from your monitoring site. Each monitoring site typically has 5 sampling locations. These are labeled A through E. You'll collect 1 sample from each of these locations every time you go out to monitor. At some of these locations, you'll also collect additional water samples for quality control and quality assurance purposes. Please watch our video on quality control and quality assurance sampling for more information. You'll always want to refer to the map found in your field guide before taking samples to know when, where, and what kinds of samples you should be taking. It's very important to take your samples at the exact same location each time you go out. The map in your field guide should have landmarks in it to help you know where these specific locations are. You should refer to the map frequently to ensure you're collecting samples from the right location. It's also important to note that you should never go out sampling alone. We always recommend having at least 2 people out, 1 person for collecting samples and 1 person for recording the data. This is not only more fun, it's safer and easier to get good data. Now we'll go through the sample collection protocol. The steps we'll review here can also be found in your field guide for easy reference when you're out taking these samples. This protocol is broken down into 10 steps. Putting on your personal protective equipment, sanitizing your hands, grabbing the appropriate sampling vessel, in this case, a Whirl-Pak, entering the water, opening your Whirl-Pak, collecting your sample, recording your sample collection time, ensuring the viability of your sample, putting your sample in a cooler, and finally, sanitizing your hands again. These steps are then repeated until you've collected all the samples you need. We'll begin with step 1. Putting on your personal protective equipment, or PPE. You'll decide on what protective equipment you need when designing your monitoring plan. This might be something like a PFD, which can be helpful during dock sampling, but it could also be something like waders, which can help you avoid contaminants in the water while sampling. We strongly recommend that all monitoring plans include vinyl gloves as part of their PPE. This not only protects the sampler from potentially contaminated waters, but it also helps avoid cross-contamination between samples. Next, you'll sanitize your vinyl gloved hands. This might feel kinda weird, but it will help protect your samples from cross-contamination. Now you'll grab your sample collection vessel. At Swim Drink Fish, we use Whirl-Paks. Whirl-Paks are pre-labeled with the names of the locations where you'll be taking your sample. You'll grab the Whirl-Pak that corresponds to the location you're going to take your sample from. For example, if I'm collecting a sample from Site C, I'll grab the Whirl-Pak with the label C. Now you'll wade into the water to collect your sample. We should note that this video goes over the protocol for how to collect a sample by wading into the water. This is what you do if you're collecting a sample from a gently sloped access point like a beach. However, this isn't the only way you can collect a sample. Samples could also be collected from lying down on a dock or using a sampling pole, which is especially helpful for sites where it's hard to reach the water. For now, we'll stick with wading. You'll wade into the water until you're about 0.5 meters deep. This is just above the knee for most people. If when walking into the water, you notice you disturb the bottom sediment, making the water cloudy, you should wait until the water clears back up before you go ahead and collect your sample. Now you'll open your Whirl-Pak. To do this, you'll rip off the top of the Whirl-Pak along the perforated edge. Then, use the 2 white tabs on the side of the Whirl-Pak to pull it open. Now at this point, you might be really tempted to put your finger in the Whirl-Pak to help you open it, but we never put our fingers inside Whirl-Paks as this can contaminate our sample. With that in mind, it's time to collect our sample. You'll grab the Whirl-Pak with one hand, making sure not to grasp it too tightly. You'll then dip your arm into the water until it's about 30 centimeters deep. For most people, this is about elbow depth. Now you'll move your arm through the water in one sweeping motion until you fill up your Whirl-Pak. You'll check to make sure the Whirl-Pak is filled between the 2 black lines of 100 and 118 milliliters. Now you'll seal your water sample by swiftly twirling the Whirl-Pak away from you 3 times. Then take the top ends of the Whirl-Pak and twist them around each other, similar to how you would with a bread tie. Now turn the sample upside down to make sure there are no leaks. Now you'll record the sample collection time. The sampler will let the recorder know they've collected the sample. The recorder will then put the time on the sample collection data sheet. Before we put our sample in the cooler, we always want to make sure that it's viable. Here are a few tips for collecting the perfect sample, meaning a sample that is both properly filled and properly sealed. A properly filled sample is one that has water in between the two black fill lines, which represent 100 and 118 milliliters. Collecting the right amount of water ensures that we have enough water to properly analyze our samples back at the lab. If you've collected too much water, meaning that there's water above the top black fill line, you'll very carefully and slowly pour some of that water out. You'll pour enough out until it's below that top black line. If there's not enough water in your sample, meaning the water is below the lower black line, you'll have to retake your sample. In this case, you'll pour all the water out of the sampling vessel to retake it. You'll notice our sampler is smoothing the Whirlpak out. This avoids the chance of an air pocket forming in your Whirlpak, which can make it difficult to fill. You'll then go ahead and retake the sample. Remember that all samples should be taken in one singular sweeping motion. If you don't collect enough water in one singular sweeping motion, just pour it out and try again. Now that you have the right amount of water in your sample, you can go ahead and re-whirl up your Whirlpak just like we showed before. To make sure our samples are properly sealed, we make sure there's a headspace or a little air pocket at the top of our Whirlpak. If your sample looks a little more like this, where you can push down on the top or squish the sides, that means you don't have an air pocket, which makes your sample non-viable. In this case, you'll need to reseal your Whirlpak by once again twirling it away from you 3 times and twisting the ties shut. The most common reason that samples don't have a headspace is caused by slow twirling of your Whirlpak. Make sure when you're twirling your Whirlpak, you're doing so swiftly, just like we've done here. Now, when you take a look at your Whirlpak, you'll notice that there's an airspace at the top, and that if you poke it, it's nice and taut. A perfectly sealed Whirlpak also doesn't leak. Just like we did before, we have to remember to turn our sample upside down and make sure there are no drips. Now that you know you have the perfect sample, you can put it in the cooler. You'll now wade out of the water carefully to put your sample in the cooler. E. coli is affected by temperature and light, so storing our water samples in a cold, dark environment, like this cooler, is incredibly important for achieving representative water quality results. Samples are kept in a container inside the cooler so that samples are not directly placed on ice, as this can affect the results. We also want to make sure that we keep our cooler closed and sealed or zipped up in between putting samples in it to maintain the temperature of the cooler. Finally, we're on to the last step. It's time to sanitize again. You'll once again sanitize your hands. You should do this in between every sample you collect in order to avoid cross-contamination. And that's it. Now you know how to collect a water sample. You'll repeat these steps to collect all the other samples you need for your site. Again, this should be a minimum of 5 samples. Remember, all the steps for collecting your samples are available in your field guide. We strongly recommend following this, especially if you're new to sampling. As we mentioned at the beginning of this video, you'll also have to collect some quality control and quality assurance samples while you're out monitoring. You can watch this video on those steps here. You'll also want to watch our video on how to fill out your field data sheets so that you can make sure you're properly documenting your sample collection process. Now you've done it. Remember, the most important step is to give yourself a high five and celebrate the awesome work you've done with your team. Thanks for watching this video on how to collect a water sample, and thank you for joining the movement of swimmable, drinkable, fishable water.